we're not expecting a huge crowd today because we haven't been online. We haven't been online for about 3 weeks, I think. With anyone. Here's Gokularani and Hare Krishna Gokularani. Hi, Haribol, Gastafapa. Nice to see you. We can't make out the other devotees. It looks like Narottam, but I'm not sure. I want to see Goga. I don't see me, but I want to see Goga. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nityanamine Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nityanamine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Devasesha Sunyavaride Astyacharisha Tarine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Devasesha Sunyavaride Astyacharisha Tarine Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktavindam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktavindam Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Palalapa Girivaradhari Jaya Gopijana Palalapa Girivaradhari Jaya Gopijana Palalapa Girivaradhari Jaya Gopijana Palalapa Girivaradhari Yasodanandana Rajana Ranjana Yasodanandana Rajana Ranjana Yasodanandana Rajana Ranjana Yasodanandana Rajana Ranjana Yamunatira 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 Radha Madhava Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Jai Om Vishnu Pada Paramahamsa. Parivajikacharya Ashtotar Satishta A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki. Anantakota Vaishnavrinda ki. Namacharya Shraddha Thakur ki. Prem Se Gaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda ki. Shri Sri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shamakund Radhakund Giri Govardhan ki. Shri Vrindavan Dham ki. Shri Mayapur Dham ki. Ganga Maya ki. Jamuna Maya ki. Tulasi Deva ki. Bhakti Deva ki. Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki. Lord Chaitanya's Harinam Sankirtan ki. Brihat Madanga ki. Shri Prabhupada ki. Shri Shri Gaur Nitai ki. Shri Shri Krishna Balaram ki. Shri Shri Radha Govinda Marpa ki. Giraj Maharaj ki. Agoda Premanandi. All glorious to the assembled devotees. All glorious to the assembled devotees. All glorious to the assembled devotees. All glorious to Sri Guru and Sri Radha. All glorious to Sri. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Tiname Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Pacharine Namaste Srimavadi Pastachade Shatari Jai Shri Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, dear devotees. The last few weeks we've been traveling around in England and doing programs mostly at the time when we normally have our Zoom sessions. We're usually in some temple or some place giving some program or another. So I'm sorry we haven't done any direct Zoom classes the last few weeks, but perhaps you've been tuning in. We've had, I think on most temples that they've been, let's say, recording it, etc., etc. So today we'll go back to where we left off, Srimad Bhagavatam. Now you've got two choices here. You can either you have your book, or I have also put it on PowerPoint. So I'm going to request share screen with our host now, and hopefully you'll be able to see it in a few seconds. Open up the PowerPoint. Just give me 1 second. Today we're on the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 2, text number 14. And I just have to check which one it is. This one?
This one.
Not
Oh,
this
yes,
one.
this one.
This one here. There's two of them up there. Okay. You should be able to see it on your screen. If you have, it's maybe a little bit bigger on the screen. Yeah, those who haven't got such good eyesight, like myself, maybe, you can see it on the screen now. So this is the verse. Well, last week we, not last week, last month, or whenever it was, we did text 13, and today we're on text 14. So we can chant together. Tasmare kena manasa, tasmare kena manasa, Bhagavan Satvatam Patihi,
Bhagavan
Satvatam Patihi, Shrutavya Kirtitavyascha, Kirtitavyascha, Jaya Pujascha Nityada.
Yeya Pujascha
Nityada.
Nityada.
Tasmadikena Manasa.
Tasmadikena Manasa.
Bhagavan Sattvatang Patihi.
Bhagavan Sattvatam Patihi.
Shrotavya Kirtitavyascha.
Shrotavya Kirtitavascha.
Jaya Pujascha Nityada.
Yeya Pujascha Nityada.
Tasmadikena Manasa.
Tasmadikena Manasa.
Bhagavan Sattvatang Patihi.
Bhagavan Sattvatam Patihi.
Shrotavya Kirtitavyascha.
Shrotavya Kirtitavascha.
Jaya Pujascha Nityada.
Yeya Pujascha Nityada.
It's a very nice verse to keep or learn, keep with us. It's one of the series of very significant verses in the Bhagavatam, and it helps us to remember our goal in life and also the means to attain it. We'll read the verse word for word. Tasmat, therefore, ekena,
Ekena.
by one,
By one.
manasa,
Manasa.
attention of the mind,
Attention of the mind.
Bhagavan,
Bhagavan.
the personality of Godhead,
The personality of Godhead.
Sattvatam,
Sattvatam.
of the devotees,
Of the devotees.
Patihi,
Patihi.
protector,
Protector.
Shrotavyaha,
Shrotavya.
is to be heard,
Is to be heard.
Kirtitavyaha,
Kirtitavya.
to be glorified,
To be glorified.
Cha,
Cha.
and
And
Jayaha,
Jeyaha.
to be remembered,
To be remembered.
Pujaha,
Pujaha.
to be worshipped,
To be worshipped.
Cha,
Cha.
and
And
Nityada,
Nityada.
constantly.
Constantly.
Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. This verse is spoken by Sutta Goswami in answer to the sages of Naimishranya, their relevant questions. And he's explaining now what the highest religious principle is for a human being and how one can attain, as in other ages, various processes, but in this age, how one can attain that perfection of human form of life. So Sutta Goswami says, therefore, with one pointed attention, one should constantly hear about, glorify, remember, and worship the personality of Godhead, who is the protector of the devotees. And in the purport, we find Srila Prabhupada here. If realization of the absolute truth is the ultimate aim of life, it must be carried out by all means. In any one of the above mentioned castes and orders of life, the four processes, namely glorifying, hearing, remembering, and worshipping, are general occupations. This is nothing really to do with what we do in terms of our occupation. Although the occupation, of course, can be a good support for our service, both practically as well as emotionally. Emotionally in the sense that one rightly situated is more likely to be a little more peaceful in mind, more satisfied in that sense, without too many disturbances in one's world around one. But whatever one's situation, whatever occupation, even if we're not engaged according to our propensities, even if we're not engaged at all in the sense in an occupational activity per se, the principles are still the same. The four processes of namely glorifying, hearing, remembering, and worshipping, these are always there, a basic standard of devotional practice. Kirtan, Shravanam, Smaranam, and whatever form our worship takes. it may take various forms. For whatever type of worship it is, it must be there. Whether it's deity worship hour, it could be deity worship and other services, Sankirtan, whatever form it may be of worshiping the Lord. For Sankirtan is Kirtan. So worshiping specifically here refers to the one's home or temple, having an altar and offering one's foodstuffs to the Lord, offering arti, whatever is within one's means, but some form of worship should be there for everyone. It may just be a picture, but something should be there. At least we should offer our food to the Lord. So much as more than that we can do, more the merrier. But these are general occupations, and anyone can do, even a child can do. Without these principles of life, no one can exist. But of course, Prabhupada is using this in terms of ordinary dealings as well as devotional dealings. Activities of the living being involve engagements in these four different principles of life. Especially in modern society, all activities are more or less dependent on hearing and glorifying. Especially these days, where pretty much everything, not so much maybe now, but over the last few years, most of our communication has been online, at least for many people. We're hearing and asking questions, or speaking, or something. Any man from any social status becomes a well-known man in human society within a very short time if he is simply glorified, truly or falsely, in the daily newspapers. Now, of course, more by other means of social media, newspapers are still there, of course, but social media has so many other methods now of spreading news, true or false. It's very accelerated. Sometimes political leaders of a particular party are also advertised by newspaper propaganda, and by such a method of glorification, an insignificant man becomes an important man within no time. But such propaganda, by false glorification of an unqualified person, cannot bring about any good, either for the particular man or for the society. There may be some temporary reactions to such propaganda, but there are no permanent effects. It's all under the guise of, not guise, but under the control of karma. People may think that they're the doer, that they're some special person or something. But according to karma, some people may be empowered in various ways to act in certain ways. But it's not there, you could say, there in the greatness as such. The greatness is when they utilize that empowerment in the service of Krishna. When they recognize that ability is nothing but Krishna's ability in power, slightly reposed in them. And according to the will of the Lord, they may be able to, perform acts which seem miraculous to other people around them, or other people around them aspiring to the similar thing, worship them accordingly. But whatever power we may have, whatever beauty we may have, whatever knowledge, strength, whatever it may be, even renunciation, everything has its origin in Krishna. We're just temporarily, you could say, endowed with such qualities in this lifetime. Because the negative qualities are also due to karma. Ultimately, they're a perversion of the positive qualities. Just like in relation with Krishna, there are direct and indirect relationships are there. The indirect relationships do have a part to play in, let's say, spicing the direct relationships. Like spices have an important part for most people anyway. Salt, pepper, different things, in enhancing the taste of the food. They're not the food itself. You can't live on spices alone. If someone gives you a meal which is comprised completely of spices, it's not going to be very savory. It's not going to be maybe savory, not very satisfying. And certainly everyone will not be able to sustain oneself on such a menu. Nothing but salt, pepper, chilies, cumin seeds, hing, and whatever else you like, mustard, etc., etc. No food, no vegetables, no rice, no nothing, just spices. So that obviously doesn't work. So when the indirect natures, anger, fear, all these different things, tend to dominate, then you have a really serious problem. Or they're expressed in the wrong place, just like if you put salt in sweet rice or in milk, it's completely incompatible. So sometimes the indirect nature is manifested in situations when it's not meant to be. There is a place for anger, there is a place for fear, and so on and so forth, a healthy place. But when it's in the wrong situation, it can create stomach problems, constipation, diarrhea, whatever it may be. Same with spices like that. There may be some temporary. Therefore, such activities are a waste of time. So from the other angle, they do not, spiritual practice, they do not help us. Even if we may follow somebody who's very great in this material world, or very attached to something which appears very great in this material world, it doesn't really help us in our spiritual life. It may temporarily give us some inspiration, some satisfaction, something or another, even some returns, but ultimately has no value whatsoever unless it's connected to the Lord. The actual object of glorification is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So if you see something beautiful, like in the Bhagavad Gita, we see so many times Krishna is explaining how he is present in all the various energies of this world. So to remember Krishna, we may be a little attached to the objects of our senses, but to remember how they're all related to Krishna, how they all come from Krishna ultimately, whether perverted through the modes of nature or not, they all eventually or originally come from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he's the one to be glorified. He's the source of everything, not whoever we think we are in this world. Not even nature. Nature is Krishna's external nature. It's his nature. It's not that it's just independent, has no cause. Nature means referring to somebody's nature. So the material nature is a reflection of Krishna's superior nature. The actual object of glorification is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who has created everything manifest before us. We have broadly discussed this fact in our comments on the Janananda verse in the Srimad Bhagavatam Shlok. At the beginning of the Bhagavatam, the tendency to glorify others or hear others must be turned to the real object of glorification, the Supreme Being, and that will bring happiness. It's a tough one, isn't it? We're very much seeing ourselves in the center. One of the biggest obstacles on the path of devotional service, and because it keeps people bound up in this material world, but for those aspiring for Krishna consciousness, one of the biggest obstacles on the path is this, let's say, wanting to be recognized, seeing oneself in the center. It's a manifestation of pride. It's a manifestation that we're still covered by false ego. We're still seeing ourselves in the center. The question may be, what are we going to do about it? It's a name, fame, prestige. We like it. When somebody glorifies me, I like it. I know it's wrong, but there's a natural reaction within the consciousness. You feel good. It comes from Krishna. And Krishna's the origin. And of course, he's worthy of glorification because everything comes from him. Even that comes from him. Everything comes from him. But there it says, on that plane, it's a little different. So what do? We could say, first, before we get further into that, I'm going to share something more. Because this verse, which we've just read or heard from Srimad Bhagavatam, is not repeated word for word, but it's repeated almost in other parts of the Bhagavatam, because it's such an important thing. To make this change, which we require, it's not just a matter of learning the Bhagavatam, it's a matter of hearing it submissively. And as long as we've got this false egotistical view of the world around us, even in relationship to the Srimad Bhagavatam, we can be extracting our own, let's say, what we want to extract out of it. It's not a question. I mean, the other day, one devotee said to me, it got stuck in my mind. I don't know why. He said, I'm always trying to find a situation where I feel comfortable, where I feel good. But I don't look for a situation which is good for me. We forget who we are. We're looking to satisfy our present conditioned idea of who we are, mentally, physically, etc. But that may or may not be good for us. It may be at certain stages required, of course. And to a certain extent, it's always going to be there unless we're pure. But we should also realize that for that change to take place in our perspective, in our consciousness, and sometimes we have to accept situations which may not appear to be so good for us, so comfortable. And that is called penance. That's called austerity. Getting up in the morning at whatever time we may get up. If we're actually on the spiritual path, we'll be endeavoring to reduce eating and sleeping to some degree, at least as we progress. And getting up early in the morning is one example. It may not be possible for everyone. Taking a shower or bath, just offering all the food to Krishna before we eat it, before we even think about eating it. These are austerities. Chanting 16 rounds of japa or more, or whatever we're doing. An austerity, going out on the street. Maybe we don't want to do that. Exposing ourselves to the public. Maybe they'll say something unpleasant to us. Maybe we'll get in trouble. Maybe it's hard for my mind. These things are austerities, but we have to use our common sense. We can't imitate. We may get some direction what austerity is appropriate, but the principle of penance is absolutely required. Without penance, which is the very heart of the Lord, penance means to actually, and this, I could say in its original root form, means to put Krishna in the center, to always be acting for the pleasure of Krishna. So in this world, that penance may not be consciously, we may not be so consciously aware of that, but when we're engaged in these are activities which can gradually transform our perspective, or our perception of ourselves and the world around us, and so on and so forth, in relationship with Krishna. Gradually, Krishna is helping us. So I'm going to share screen now. I'm not going to share screen, excuse me, yes, I am going to share. Where have I gone here? Getting lost on the screen, there we go. And this is a very famous, I don't know how that came up next. It's not supposed to come up next. Not quite sure how that happened. It was a mistake. This one here, this verse from the second canto, is a similar theme. And this is right at the beginning of the second canto. So Sutta Goswami, in the first canto, Sutta Goswami is speaking mostly. And the verse which we read today was spoken by Sutta Goswami, emphasizing this important point, how we must always, worship here and glorify and remember and worship the personality of Godhead with one pointed attention. It's not just mechanical, with our mind somewhere else, or doing other things at the same time. You can do that also if your occupation requires it. You can still glorify Krishna whilst doing other things, no doubt, but specifically, we have eventually, at least wherever we can, have our sadhana, our japa, whatever, as much as possible with one pointed attention. We're trying to hear the sound of the holy name or hear Bhagavatam. Now, this verse also spoken by Sukadeva Goswami is one of the first verses in response to the question of Parikshit Maharaj, who asked, what is the duty of a man at the time of death? What should he be thinking about? So he makes it quite clear, because Parikshit Maharaj was on the verge of death. So what should we be thinking so we can avoid not just the pain or the misery, but the causes of that misery? And most people think the causes of the misery are some virus or some disease or some enemy or something, but they're not. Causes of our disease are our own false ego. Causes of our suffering are our own false ego, seeing ourselves in the center. This can be transformed by this process. Tasmad bharata sarvatma Bhagavan Ishvaro Harihi Shrotavya Kiritavyascha Martavyas Chechatavayam. O descendant of King Bharat, one who desires to be free from all miseries must hear about, glorify, and also remember the personality of Godhead, who is the Supersoul, the controller, and the savior from all miseries. What a nice verse in the second canto. One to make a note of. You can make a note of that. Maybe you want to learn that one too. At least remember it. Remember the principle. If you desire to be freed of all miseries, this is the process. It may not seem to be the goal, but it's the process of becoming freed of miseries. Kleshagni, one of the first stages in the execution of pure devotional service. One must hear about, glorify, and remember the personality of Godhead, who is the Supersoul, controller, and the savior from all misery. No one else can save us from miseries. We may try, we may try to cross the ocean, by Prabhupada says, by holding on to a dog's tail. Maybe for a little while, the dog will go down with us after a while. Anyone in this material world is in the same boat, basically. They may for a temp, it's like we're in a quicksand. You know? The term quicksand is like some mud that you sink into, it sort of sucks you into it. And someone else is higher, they're not so down as you are, and you grab hold of them. So maybe you go down a little slower, but you still go down. You know, we may take shelter of all, which we obviously do, of medical aid and this aid, but we're still going down. And so are those giving us the aid. Everyone's going down. Only Krishna can take us out of this material ocean, no one else, out of this quicksand. So, yeah, such important verses to remember. This is the process. It's not just something we do because we like it. It's not just something we do because of whatever reason it may be, some other motivation. This is the only means of emancipation from illusion, from suffering, and ultimately the only means to awaken or to take us or to bring us to safe land, to bring us to the spiritual platform, where there'll be no more chance of coming under the influence of the illusory energy. Go to the next one. Oh, this is the purport to that verse. There we go. Some of it, I've just selected a few parts of the purport, not the whole purport. One should not do anything, either good or bad, on his own account, but must execute everything on behalf of the Supreme Lord, the ultimate proprietor of everything that be. Well, that's the peace formula from the Bhagavad Gita. You may be familiar with the Srimad Bhagavad Gita verse, Bhuktaram Yagatapasam Sarvaloka Maheshwaram Suvidam Sarvabhutanam Yatvamam Shanti Richati. Peaceful. One who understands that Krishna is the proprietor, enjoyer, and friend of everyone, and not bewildered by this material, can gain peace from the pangs of material existence. Ultimately, after practically applying this process of hearing, chanting, remembering, and worshiping the Lord, will develop attachment to Krishna. This is the essential growth. Attachment must be there. One must love. Prabhupada said the other day, we must love our service. So sometimes in the beginning, we may not love everything we're doing, but we have to have some attraction to some aspect of hearing, chanting, remembering, worshiping, and so on and so forth, to progress in spiritual life. Therefore, one should first of all hear about the Lord. Carrying on with the reading. When one has perfectly and scrutinizingly heard, one must glorify his acts and deeds. First thing is to hear. What can we do? What we know if we don't hear? There's different ways of hearing through the various senses. Let's say that knowledge requiring senses receive knowledge, and we act on according to what we receive through our knowledge acquiring senses. One must glorify his acts and deeds, and thus it will become possible to remember constantly the transcendental nature of the Lord. This is a means of changing our, form, the mental form, which may be full of all kinds of thoughts, Obviously, if we're working in some occupation, we have to do what we have to do. Naturally, the mind will be thinking of aspects of that occupation, but not more than necessary. That is our goal of life. We may be a family person, so naturally we're going to be thinking about our family and everything else that goes along with it, but not more than necessary. And trying to also connect that to Krishna. We're doing, trying to connect that to Krishna, so it's not completely, let's say, like two worlds. We have to try to connect the two worlds. And by hearing very carefully, one who is perfectly unscrutinizingly heard. If we hear carefully in the next chapter, the third chapter of this Srimad Bhagavatam, also Sutta Goswami, it says, now I'll try to teach you the same thing that I have learned from my spiritual master. And now I'm going to try to teach you the very same thing. And you should hear it with rapt attention. This is perfect scrutinizingly hearing, very careful hearing, without interference or without other thoughts coming in. We attentive, submissive hearing. And Sutta Goswami says that one who hears attentively is not just a matter of just hearing, but the hearing needs to become attentive, which means submissive, not challenging, not mixed, not through some discrimination according to our conditioning, like that, but just submissive hearing, which means to associate with the Lord in the form of Srimad Bhagavatam, or the holy name. Everything comes, the Lord purifies our hearts and our way we see the world, and so on and so forth, and our attractions for the temporary objects of this world can subside the more we submissively hear the sound of Bhagavatam. So we may not understand it, we may not agree with it from our present false egotistical position, but by submissing and hearing of the subject matter, the heart becomes purified of all of these various anarthas, these various upadis, false identities, the various attachments which we have in this material world and so on, become purified by exposing ourselves to the sound vibration of the holy name. And this should be, of course, ultimately Kintvadra Vinudinam, it should be constant hearing. We may not be able to do that, but as much as we can. Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, for grihastas, working people, it means whatever time we have, we try to hear and chant about Krishna. Don't waste our time. For Bhakti Siddhanta Maharaj, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Maharaj gave 64 rounds, and that was primarily for his grihastas, not for his renunciates, because they were already engaged, should be, in full devotional service. Whereas for grihastas, generally speaking, working people, family people, social commitments may be there. So he gave the 64 rounds for his grihasta disciples, particularly, everyone couldn't, but specifically for his grihastas. And why? One grihasta said, Guru Maharaj, I don't have time to finish my rounds, I'm so busy. And Bhakti Siddhanta Maharaj said, I know what busy you are. So much gossip. You have so much time for social media nowadays. Gossip, gossip, gossip. Most of it not very significant. You have so much time. He could see what was really the problem. Because I can't say that's the problem. We can't say that's the problem with everyone here, but it certainly is a problem. We do waste a lot of time. Much as possible. The idea is that we fill those gaps, those opportunities. One time, Janananda Goswami, you may have heard the name, wonderful devotee of Srila Prabhupada, when he was a young devotee, temple commander in LA, where he joined. The temple commander's name was Vishnu Jan Swami. And Vishnu Jan Swami, he was he was one person who was very much engaged, hearing, chanting, worshipping, remembering, and so on. So Danavir asked him one day, can I have more time, please, for reading and chanting? And Vishnujan said, no, you have enough time. You have your service to do. He said, you find time. You find time for more reading and chanting. And sure enough, he looked at his day and he found he was wasting so much time sitting there in the bus or the car, waiting to go on Sankirtan, or waiting for someone to come along, or waiting for someone to serve me prasadam, or waiting for this, waiting for that, fiddling around doing other things. He eventually, without changing his daily schedule, found 2 hours a day for reading Prabhupada's books. Interesting. He tells that story. Yes, so hearing about the Lord and, back to the verb, hearing with rapt attention. Prabhupada in the purport describes that to hear this with rapt attention, one must be pure in mind. To be pure in mind, one must be pure in one's activities. To be pure in one's activities, one must be pure in one's eating, sleeping, mating, defending. Although these things that seem external, they help us. Lifestyle, environment, an association. It helps us to hear the subject matter. That's why Prabhupada established temples. That's why it's important to have the Sangha of devotees. It's why important to try to make your home clean. In a cleaner environment, it's easier for the mind. Just look back at Naimisharanya forest, the sages of Naimisharanya. There were many, many sages. It said there were over 80,000 sages there. Huge amount. It's like being in an enormous football stadium. 80,000 people, and you are on the grass in the middle, and you have no microphone, and you have to speak to Srimad Bhagavatam. How would people hear it? Especially the ones at the back. Not even a stadium, maybe they were gathered around, but generally when they speak, people are in front. Huge crowd. And without a microphone, everyone has to hear it with rapt attention. Well, it's said that you could hear a pin drop. A pin drop. It was so silent. Even the birds stopped singing. They stopped moving. The leaves stopped rustling. The wind stopped blowing. Everything was suspended. Now, in the ether, the ether is so pervaded with so much electromagnetic energy, so much transmission of sound through subtle forms, through the through the ether rather, that the ether is so contaminated. It's like blocked, it's cloudy. Everything gets distorted in the ether. Sound vibration gets distorted very quickly because of everything, all the other sound vibrations, what to speak of the subtle ones. And it's very hard to hear. But when Sutta Goswami was speaking, not only the gross energy was suspended or silent, so the sound could pass cleanly through the atmosphere, but the subtle energy was also pure. So the minds were not disturbed. In our modern society, you don't have to do anything. You'll be disturbed. Don't worry, by doing nothing, you'll still be disturbed because of so much negative or useless vibration in the ether, in the subtle energies, which disturbs one's mind even without knowing why. We're living in such a disturbed atmosphere. So therefore, an endeavor to make one's home or one's environment as peaceful as possible, as Krishna conscious as possible, is a very valuable aid, you could say, for hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam with rapt attention. We'll read on. Hearing about and glorifying the Lord are identical with the transcendental nature of the Lord. And by so doing, one will be always in the association of the Lord. This brings freedom from all sorts of fear. This is another nice point. When we're in the association of the Lord, no fear. He's the protector, as the verse we read today, protector of the devotees. One feels secure. Whatever you want to do, my Lord, that's up to you. but I feel safe in your hands. This is faith. We put our hearts at the lotus feet of the Lord. Do as you wish with me. We may not be at that point, but that's devotional service. We're working towards it. A child may feel the same way, a little child in the presence of his parents. Fearless, convinced that his parents will provide what it needs, preserve what it lacks, protect it in need of danger. It may not, parents may not be able to, but the child feels that that's the only security practically. All a person's activities become molded into spiritual activities by his hearing about and glorifying the Lord. And thus all conceptions of material miseries become completely vanquished. Already discussed. And another very similar verse in the second canto, chapter 2, text 36. Tasmat sarvatmana rajan hari sarvatra sarvada shrotavya kiritavyascha martavyo bhagavan rinam. O king, it is therefore essential that every human being hear about, glorify, and remember the Supreme Lord, the personality of Godhead, always and everywhere. What a wonderful meditation. Thought just came to my mind. It's so wonderful. All we were doing is just glorifying the Lord, chanting his names, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam with others, sharing this association with others, and not even worrying about eating, sleeping. They happen when they happen, and so on and so forth. We're not, obviously, we can't imitate the great devotees. Such a nice meditation to be always in that situation of constantly hearing about glorifying the personality of God wherever we are. Prabhupada emphasizes many times, wherever we go, whatever we do, we should chant Hare Krishna as much as we can. Keep chanting. Prabhupada also describes this will help us to overcome this false ego, although it may still be there. By continuing to chant and chant more, this helps us to overcome that false ego, which tends to accompany us, let's say. It's always there on our path, wanting to be recognized, wanting our own comfort zones, wanting others to recognize that, and so on and so forth. We don't like to be chastised, we don't like to be corrected, we think we know it all, or whatever. Different aspects of the false ego may be there. It says essential here. It doesn't just say, yeah, as you like. Essential, if we want to go back to Godhead, if we want to get free of misery, if we want to make use of our human life, it's essential that we have to hear and chant and remember the personality of God. Everything should be directed or arranged to help us to achieve that very purpose. And I didn't put it into Sanskrit, sorry, yeah. Anyway. Srila Sukadeva Goswami begins this verse with the word tasmat, or therefore, because in a previous verse he has already explained there is no auspicious means for salvation other than the sublime process of Bhakti Yoga. The Bhakti Yoga process is practiced by the devotees in different methods like hearing, chanting, remembering, serving the lotus feet of the Lord, worshipping, praying, rendering service in love, becoming friendly, and offering all that one may possess. All 9 methods are bona fide methods, and either all of them, some of them, or even one of them can bring about the desired result for the sincere devotee. But out of all the 9 different methods, the first one, namely hearing, is the most important function in the process of Bhakti Yoga. Without hearing sufficiently and properly, no one can make any progress by any of the other methods of practice. So hearing is the most important, Shravanam, Kirtanam, the most important of all the processes. Hearing, chanting, because chanting has to be there before we can hear, but we're not chanting, we're hearing someone who is chanting. So from our point of view, hearing is the most important. We have to hear from the right source attentively, then the change of heart will take place. And for hearing only, all the Vedic literatures are there. Blocking the screen. They are there compiled by authorized persons like Vyasadeva, who is a powerful incarnation of Godhead. And since it has been ascertained that the Lord is the supersoul of everything, he should therefore be heard and glorified everywhere and always, because he is everywhere and he is always. That is the special duty of the human being. Other forms of glorification are only temporary, so one only gets temporary results. We glorify some famous person or whatever it is, or ourselves. And that is a temporary, if at all, if you want to call it a benefit, it's only temporary. It has no permanent effect. It doesn't help reduce the whirlpools, it said, of material existence. We're still stuck in the whirlpool going around this samsara cycle. When the human being gives up the process of hearing about the all-pervading personality of Godhead, he becomes a victim of hearing rubbish transmitted by man-made machines. Rubbish transmitted by man-made machines. Like when Prabhupada was saying this, he was referring to those at the moment where we had televisions, radios, whatever, not many others came with phones, telephones, maybe some other things, telegrams. I remember when the telex, there was a thing called, you probably even know what it is, there was a machine called a telex machine, which came out in the 70s, and people were starting to communicate with each other by telex, a very mechanical means. You have this machine, you type into this machine, and the person at the other end kind of gets it. It comes out on their machine. It was quite, quite crude. And one GBC member said, "Should we install these in all our temples?" Prabhupada said, "No, it will simply increase the gossip between you all." So what to speak of mobile phones? Goodness me, 99.9% probably gossip, other than occupational interactions, but it's mostly gossip. People are looking for attention, especially in our world where we have such an unnatural interaction and an unnatural lifestyle, and it's been more or less solidified by our modern means of communication. We communicate on the mobile, we don't even see each other. Even people sitting next to each other sometimes send text messages to each other. It's amazing. It's such an amazing situation we find ourselves in. Not easy. But anyway, Prabhupada's saying here, rubbish transmitted by man-made machines. And sometimes we just say, what was it like when you put on these mobiles? I like.
Yes.
Yeah, I like it. It's just nonsense. Nonsense. Wasting our time like this. It is said here that it is incumbent upon the human being to hear about the Lord, and scriptures like the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam are made for that purpose. Anarto Pashamam Sakshat Bhakti Yoga Tokshite, Sutta Goswami says that there's the miseries of the living entity are nothing to do with the living entity. Superfluous. They have nothing to do with us. They can be mitigated immediately by the linking process of devotional service. But the mass of people don't know this. So therefore, Srila Vyasadeva has compiled this Srimad Bhagavatam, which is in relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So it behooves us to hear Srimad Bhagavatam regularly, whenever we can. Let's see next. Hearing is solidified by the process of chanting. One who has perfectly heard from the perfect source becomes convinced about the all-pervading personality of Godhead, and thus becomes enthusiastic in glorifying the Lord. All the great acharyas like Ramanuj, Madhva, Chaitanya, Sarasvati Thakur, or even in other countries, Mohammed, Christ, and others, have all extensively glorified the Lord by chanting always and in every place, because the Lord is all-pervading. See how Srila Prabhupada can see this, pure devotees can see this. It may not be very deep, it may be a little bit, you can say, indirect, but all the devotees of the Lord, they may present a process which doesn't seem to be very transcendental, but it's setting the environment, creating an environment which in the long run will be favorable to help people to adopt or to take up the glorification of the personality of God. Purely. Because the Lord is all-pervading, it is essential to glorify Him always and everywhere. In the process of glorifying the Lord, there should be No restriction of time and space. I said there are no hard and fast rules in chanting the holy name. It means according to time and space. This is called Sanatan Dharma or Bhagavat Dharma. It means eternal occupation. Sanatan means eternal, always and everywhere. Bhagavat means pertaining to Bhagavan, the Lord. The Lord is the master of all time and all space, and therefore the Lord's holy name must be heard, glorified, and remembered everywhere in the world. That will bring about the desired peace and prosperity, so eagerly awaited by the people of the world. The word cha includes all the remaining processes or methods of Bhakti Yoga, as mentioned above. When we go to the Bhagavad Gita, there are several verses in the Bhagavad Gita which are very similar, and more or less every verse points, either creates an environment, a way of seeing the world, the importance of correct association, how to deal according to one's nature with the modes of material nature, in a way which is favorable to come to this point of this particular verse, actually not this one, there's another verse which is almost identical, same principle, how to come to this point of always thinking, engage your mind always in thinking of me, become my devotee, offer obeisances to me and worship me, being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me. So this is the 9th chapter, the last verse of the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Manmana Bhavamad Bhakto Madhyati Mam Namaskuru Mami Vaishasi Vaivam Atmanam Atparayanaha. Exactly halfway through the Bhagavad Gita, this verse is spoken by Krishna, and at the end he speaks almost the same verse to emphasize this is the real perfection of the Bhagavad Gita. It's called the Paribhashya Sutra, the verse which contains the actual essence of the teaching. The whole purpose of the Bhagavad Gita is to come to this point, to actually be thinking always of Krishna, worshipping him, being devoted to him, and so on. This is the point. The Bhagavad Gita comes to that point in Bhagavatam, particularly as the subject matter, which is that remembrance of Krishna. In the purport, again, I've selected, I think maybe not, but I've selected certain points from these purports. One should therefore engage his mind in the eternal form, the primal form of Krishna. With conviction in his heart that Krishna is the supreme, he should engage himself in worship. There are hundreds of thousands of temples in India for the worship of Krishna, and devotional service is practiced there. When such practice is made, one has to offer obeisances to Krishna. One should lower his head before the deity and engage his mind and his body as active as everything. By lowering your head, bowing down, this is, maybe we don't want to. Why should I bow down to anyone? When we do it mechanically, of course, it's better than nothing, but it's not necessarily with sincere feeling either. Just ritualistic. But part of the process of coming out of our egotistical, self-centered perspective of the world is to do this as an austerity. When you go into the temple and leave the temple and devotees bowing down, when we offer prasadam, every time bowing down. Just last week or two ago at the Bhaktivedanta Manor, Boy George was there. You may never have heard of him. I don't know. He is maybe still a famous musician. And he came to Bhaktivedanta Manor and he gave a concert, kind of a concert, in the new Haveli building at Bhaktivedanta Manor. Hundreds and hundreds of devotees and guests were there. And he spoke a little bit, but mainly he sang the Hare Krishna mantra, and he got everyone jumping up and down. He jumped into the audience and jumped with them. He's 60 years old. He was jumping also with the devotees. He's a little unusual. He's a little extraordinary, but he's very much attracted to devotional service, and especially to chanting the holy name of Krishna. So there's another good example. We're not quite so famous as George Harrison, but very famous musician in his time for sure. And he was singing his song. He had one famous song, perhaps it was written in the 80s, I don't know. It was called Bow Down, Mr. Hare Krishna, Hare Ram. There were other lines to it, of course, but that was like one of the theme line, bow down, Mr. Hare Krishna, Hare Ram. He was, he did a great service. He said he wrote that song after he went to Radhakund, Govardhan. He became inspired and he took bath in Radhakund. And after that, he felt inspired to write this song, Bow Down, Mr. Hare Krishna, Hare Ram. So he was extremely happy to be with devotees. He's a devotee. So this way you can glorify, according to your occupation, you can glorify the Lord by saying somehow or another. Of course, in his position is more, we could say, more spreading. He's a famous person, so we can spread it like that. But it doesn't matter, whatever we're doing, somehow or another in our service to glorify Krishna, whatever situation we're in. We may be very little, small folk, but whatever we can do, we glorify the Lord. Let's see, where are we? Yes. Conviction in his heart that Krishna is supreme. There are hundreds and thousands of temples in India. Devotional service is practiced there. When such practice is made, one has to offer obeisances. Yeah. One should lower his head before the deity and engage his mind, body, and activities, everything. Bow down, Mister. That will make one fully absorbed in Krishna without deviation. This will help one transfer to the Krishna Loka. One should not be deviated by unscrupulous commentators. One must engage in the 9 different processes of devotional service, beginning with hearing and chanting about Krishna. Pure devotional service is the highest achievement of human society. And then the other verse, the Paribhasya Sutta, which is at the end, almost word for word, not exactly, but very much so. Manmana bhavamat bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. Mamme vaishasi satyang te patijane priyosi me. Always think of me, become my devotee. Worship me and offer your homage unto me. Thus you will come to me without fail. I promise you this because you are my very dear friend. This is final, practically speaking, that's Sarvadharma Prajagya, of course, but this is the surrender. This is the mood of the surrender. It's always worshiping, thinking of Krishna, remembering Krishna, and so on. Surrender to Krishna. Doesn't have any other shelter other than Krishna, ultimately. Krishna is our only. This is humility. Prabhupada described it as humility, when to understand there's nothing really in this world that exists except for Krishna's mercy. This is humility. The material world is also Krishna's mercy. We may see it differently, but it is. He's given us. This comes from him. We wanted separation, so he's given us separation. It's his mercy. Everything is Krishna's mercy. To see it like that. This is humility. Fighting on the battle of Kurukshetra is Krishna's will. Humility basically means to adopt Krishna's will. It's not a question of artificial manifestation of so-called humble qualities. Trying to be humble. That may be, in the material sense, that may be there. It may accompany our practice of devotional service, but it's not genuine humility, as and until we see Krishna in the center. As and until we see everything's meant for the pleasure of Krishna, not for my own pleasure. That comes automatically when we please Krishna. Automatically. As we feed the stomach, we're automatically nourished. If we water the root of a tree, the tree automatically flourishes. So like that, when we put Krishna in the center, and everything else is satisfied. Yavan Artudapani Savatak Samplitavike, Krishna says to Arjuna, all purposes served by the tiny reservoirs are served by the great reservoir. A tiny pond is served by the great reservoir of water. Similarly, one who knows the purpose behind the Vedas, all the purposes of the Vedas are revealed. Who has achieved the goal of the Vedas. To know Krishna. It's the goal of the Vedas. Always think of me, become my devotee, worship me and offer your homage unto me. Thus you will come to me without fail. I promise you this because you are my very dear friend. That means by serving the devotees of the Lord, according to their guidelines, and practicing devotional service, and Krishna accepts one as his friend. because you're acting for his pleasure, one's acting in a way to bring him pleasure. That's how friends are developed. When we interact with each other and we find we have pleasure interacting, we call that person my friend, or they're helping me to achieve my goal. So like that, Krishna. Goal, what is Krishna's goal? Krishna's goal is to please Radharani. Radharani's goal is to please Krishna, and she likes to see all the living entities engaged in bringing pleasure to Krishna. So when Krishna sees that we're assisting Radharani in bringing pleasure, bringing him pleasure, and then he's very pleased with us. He accepts us as his friend. Radharani, rather we should say more directly, accepts us as her friend. And if you become a friend of Radharani, that's it. Yeah, that's it. Your life is perfect. That's all there is. For sure, Krishna is pleased. That's the thing that pleases Krishna most, is when Radha is pleased. Radha, Rani, if you can become her friend by assisting her and bringing pleasure to Krishna, that's the perfection of our existence. Purport, Prabhupada says, one should always act in such a way that all of his daily activities are in connection with Krishna. He should arrange his life in such a way that throughout the 24 hours he cannot but think of Krishna. See, the same theme comes up again and again. Try to arrange our lives. It can be done wherever we are. We do our best to try to arrange it to be favorable to remembering Krishna. And clutter in our homes, nonsense things in our homes, so much stuff, dirt, what to speak of, dirtiness, untidiness, uncleanliness, all these are not favorable. Not favorable. And mundane sounds, blurting out, not favorable. One has to create as much as we can. We obviously can't do everything. We're living with other people who may not be devotees, but as much as we can, we need that sacred space, if you want to call it that, where it's more favorable for us to be attentive. That one-pointedness, devotional service is meant to be Vyavasi Yatmika Bodhire Kayakura Nandana. It's meant to be one-pointed. Intelligence of those who are irresolute is many branched. Those on this path are resolute in purpose, and their aim is one. They have one aim. Their aim is to go back to Godhead. Their aim is to become completely surrendered to Krishna, to always think of Krishna, whatever it may be. But the aim is Krishna. The one aim is Krishna. There's a famous story of the Pandavas and the Kauravas when they were in the school of Dronacharya, and Dronacharya put a dummy bird into a tree, and he wanted everyone, all of his students, to shoot at that dummy bird with their arrow, and particularly to shoot through the eye of the arrow of the bird. And one by one they would come up, but before they shot, he would ask them, "What do you see?" He'd say, "I see." "What do I see?" "I see the tree." "What else do you see?" "I see, no, I see the eye." "What else do you see?" "I see the bird." "I see the tree," like that they would say. And when he came, one by one they came up and he dismissed them. Then he came to Arjuna, "What do you see?" He said, "I see the eye of the bird." "What else do you see?" "I see the eye of the bird." "What else do you see?" "I see the eye of the bird. I see nothing else." One-pointedness. One-pointedness. Focus. That doesn't mean we're blind followers. It means we see everything in relationship with Krishna. Try to mold our lives in that direction. So Prabhupada goes on, he should arrange his life in that way. And the Lord's promise is that anyone who is in such pure Krishna consciousness will certainly return to the abode of Krishna, where he will be engaged in the association of Krishna face to face. This is most confidential part of knowledge is spoken to Arjuna because he is the dear friend of Krishna. He become a friend of the devotees. One of the limbs of devotional service, to be a friend. And that means being friends with devotees. Being friends, according to our relationship, acting pleasingly to those around us. This most confidential part of knowledge. Everyone who follows the path of Arjuna can become a dear friend of Krishna and obtain the same perfection as Arjuna. These words stress that one should concentrate his mind upon Krishna, the very form with two hands carrying a flute, the bluish boy with a beautiful face and peacock feathers in his hair. There are descriptions of Krishna found in the Brahma Samhita and other literatures. One should fix his mind on this original form of Godhead, Krishna. One should not even divert his attention to other forms of the Lord. The Lord has multi-forms as Vishnu, Narayan, Rama, Varaha, etc. But a devotee should concentrate his mind on the form that was present before Arjuna. Concentration of the mind on the form of Krishna constitutes the most confidential part of knowledge. And this is disclosed to Arjuna because Arjuna is the most dear friend of Krishna's. This is the highest meditation, Krishna, that beautiful bluish form of the Lord. And there are so many descriptions of Krishna in the Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, and other scriptures, nectar of devotion. Just take advantage of it. We become attracted when we see a relatively beautiful man or woman in this world or some other scenery or something. But it's nothing. It's just a little tiny drop. Krishna says, all the beautiful things you see in this material world are but a drop of my splendor. Just a speck, not even a drop, just a speck of Krishna's glorious word of beauty. We have to hear about Krishna. And in the Bhagavad Gita, I just put this in as a verse to learn. It's a good verse to learn, to remember us in this regards, how we can in our daily lives mold our lives a little bit more towards, let's say, remembrance of Krishna. Tasmat sarveshu kalishu mammanusmara yudhyacha mayapita mano badhir mame vaishyasya sanshayam. Therefore, Arjuna, one should always think of me in the form of Krishna, and at the same time carry out your prescribed duty of fighting. With your activities dedicated to me, your mind and intelligence fixed on me, you will attain me without a doubt. Yes. Well, that's a nice verse, a little purport, not very long. And we're going to finish off this, let's say, expansion on today's verse, if you want to call it that. Famous verse in the 9th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. This verse is in relationship with Maharaj Ambarish. Savaimana Krishna Para Padara Vindayor Vachamsi Vaikuntha Gunana Vardhani Kuro Hare Mandira Majanadishu Shrutim Chakara Chutasat Kutoraye Kundalingaleha Darshane Risho Tadvritjagatra Sparshen Rasangamam Pranam Chitatpada Saroja Sorabe Srimatulasya Vasanam Chadarpite Ado Hare Kshetra Punasa Padana Sarpane Shiro Rishikesha Padabi Vandane Kamang Chadasye Dashukama Kamyaya Ito Tamishloka Janashrayavati. And famous translation, Maharaj Ambarish always engaged his mind in meditating upon the lotus feet of Krishna, his words in describing the glories of the Lord, his hands in cleansing the Lord's temple, and his ears in hearing the words spoken by Krishna or about Krishna. He engaged his eyes in seeing the deity of Krishna, Krishna's temples and Krishna's places like Mathura and Vrindavan. He engaged his sense of touch in touching the bodies of the Lord's devotees. He engaged his sense of smell in smelling the fragrance of tulasi offered to the Lord. And he engaged his tongue in tasting the Lord's prasadam. He engaged his legs in walking to the holy places and temples of the Lord, his head in bowing down before the Lord, and all of his desires in serving the Lord 24 hours a day. Indeed, Maharaj Ambarish never desired anything for his own sense gratification, and he was a great king. He had everything you could think of, partly for enjoyment. He engaged all of his senses in devotional service in various engagements related to the Lord. This is the way to increase attachment for the Lord and be completely free from all material desires. Welcome back. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So we shared, I hope we shared a few of Srila Prabhupada's unlimited gems that he's given us, undeserving that we may be, unqualified that we may be, fallen we may be. Even now we're still not very serious. We're still looking for broken pieces of glass in this material world. But the more we absorb ourselves in hearing, chanting, remembering, worshiping, and so on, in the association of devotees, and the awakening of this, the protection is there. Krishna is our protector. How he protects us, that's another thing. He's not necessarily protects us physically, that he may do, but as he wills, according to the situation. But the main protection is it protects us from falling under the influence of the false ego, which is, or under the influence of the, let's say, the effects of being under the influence of the false ego: lust, greed, anger, envy, illusion, and madness, and other details. He protects us from that if we're taking shelter of him, by calling out his names, by hearing his holy, his pastimes, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, preaching Krishna consciousness. Take shelter of the Lord as our only shelter, our only protection, particularly the Maha Mantra. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai Hare Prabhupada Ki Jai. Thank you all very much. If anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to do so. A comment or question. Give you a few minutes to think on that one. Krishna, Krishna. Jai Prabhupada. Anyone want to write something in the chat or say something on I don't know if you can be unmuted or not. If you can't write, maybe you can speak. Pure devotees, that's their business, is to always try to remind us. Pardon? Somebody's asking something on verbal or verbally. Nicholas? Haribo, Nicholas. Haribo.
Well, what to do if we can not properly associate with devotees, and rather stay at home, or because in Bhagavatam it's mentioned that only Kanishta Adhikaris go into the temple, and as Madhyam we should just preach. So to avoid these conflicts, maybe better to stay apart from the temple, or
well, it's not the better to stay apart. Sometimes Krishna even arranges that. Nothing's by chance. So sometimes we do have to go through. You're not the only one who may have brought this up or feels that way. Sometimes it is, until we, let's say, develop the necessary to go forward. Sometimes we get too familiar, or we have a particular kind of mentality, or whatever it may be. And sometimes it does sometimes have to, let's say, adjust something slightly. The better thing is to find out how we can be favorable. It doesn't mean you can, be favorable or home with everybody, but try to find a situation where you don't feel yourself or others don't feel yourself, say, creating any kind of incompatibility, any kind of disturbance of any kind. Try to find those situations where you do feel, you have some, even if it's just being quiet, or even if it's just hearing, or just rendering some service of some practical sort, eventually we have to come to this platform. So the better thing is not to just run away or just lock oneself up. Although Krishna sometimes does that, and I've seen it. We may have experienced it ourselves. Now, the better thing is to inquire, what is it that I'm doing? From those we're with, you have to see. You don't go to those you're not with. You have to go to those you're with. What is it that I need to do? Can you give me some advice how I can become, let's say, more compatible? How I can, whatever false ego, whatever it may be in our behavior, the way we speak, the way we treat others, the way we think about others negatively, and the way we behave, whatever it is, what is it? We have to look at our own hearts, not the environment around us as well. The temple is the best environment for developing devotional service, at least it should be. You can't say, when we say a temple, we do expect that the temple is a place where Krishna is glorified, not that people are glorifying themselves. That may be another reason. But that's again one we have to be careful about judging, because we're looking at it from our own imperfect perspective also. But still, it may happen like that. Now, we have to choose a situation where we feel inspired, where we want to be corrected, where we want to make advancement in spiritual life. It's called svajati, associating with those who we have something naturally, some similarity, somehow or another we're able to communicate. To cut ourselves off from the association of those will not help us. Somehow or another we have to associate, whichever form it may take. We need association, and association isn't just to share our anarthas, to share our imperfect vision. It means association with the devotees or situations which can help change and bring about the necessary change in our hearts. Some type of association must be there. It has to be there. Favorable association to help us to get out of the reason why we can't associate in a situation like the temple or in a situation of Sangha, devotees, or whatever. Something must be there, otherwise we will become alienated. When Prabhupada said, one who thinks that they can become Krishna conscious without the association of devotees is an hallucination. Now, you may not think you can, you're just suffering, or someone is suffering, maybe not you, maybe a general question, but one may be feeling, I'm too fallen sometimes. I know a devotee who felt like that. He felt himself too fallen for various reasons. He had his good reasons too. He couldn't control his senses. So he isolated himself, thinking himself too fallen. And when the time of death came, he was surrounded by devotees. Krishna informed him, no, they hadn't been seen for 20 years. Krishna informed the devotees through mystical methods, and devotees came to the hospital and surrounded him in his last moments. He was surrounded by kirtan, devotees chanting, because there was nothing he could do about it. He was emotional, he was unable, he was incapable of moving, he could hear. But Krishna reciprocates. He knows what's best for us. And sometimes it is like that. But the best thing is to find out what we can do to make the necessary change so we don't feel like that. Devotees should be happy to see devotees, should be happy to render service. We don't go to the temple to display our own ego or to do what we want. We go there for change, to make a conscious change. Anyway, it's a lovely point, and you can discuss it more with the other senior devotees there. Another point here, let's see, from New Zealand. How can one get one-pointed attention towards Krishna? It seems difficult for those engaged in material working life, and working is also necessary. Yeah, well, that was part of what we tried to talk about today, you could say. And it's natural when we hear Prabhupada's lectures, where we don't remember everything, we don't piece it all together. We don't see necessarily the examples set by the pure devotees of the Lord. I mentioned earlier on, Bhaktivinoda Thakur said that whatever time we do have, obviously you have to concentrate on your work and your family when that's your duty. We don't ignore that. Part of our needed purification, it's part of our needed stabilization, etc. Whatever time we do, we try to utilize that for hearing and chanting about Krishna. We already mentioned what supports that hearing and chanting about Krishna. And a very important, I'll give you a little example from my own life. Maybe 7 years ago, about a week ago, I spent 3 hours talking with Keshava Bharati Maharaj. We were together about 3 hours, just he and I, talking about various aspects of devotional service. But I remember I related to him my experience 7 years previously was the only previous time, or the most previous time probably, when we sat together for an extended period of time. And Keshava Bharati Maharaj, you may know, he gives daily readings for 1 or 2 hours. I don't know how long, but he gives daily readings online to anyone who wishes to tune in. He's compiled ebooks and so many things for hearing the Bhagavatam, purport, verses and purports, hearing Chaitanya Charitamrita verses and purports. And he's a very expert narrator, very clear, not too fast, and very fluent in English, not the Bengali or Sanskrit, just the English. So I remember about 7 years ago when I visited him in London, he was somehow that came out of that meeting. He never told me anything, but I picked up that he was chanting every day 32 rounds and reading 41 pages of Bhagavatam every day. And just being there with him whilst he was reading for some time. For about nearly 2 years, I was reading almost 41 pages of Bhagavatam or Chaitanya Charitamrita. We finished the Bhagavatam in 1 year, just over. And then Chaitanya Charitamrita. Now, some of you may be reading more than that, but you may not be able to because you're working people. But it inspired me. It inspired me to read more. It inspired me to make that endeavor. It means an endeavor to engage in hearing, chanting, remembering and worshipping the Lord. Is evoked in the association of those who are doing it. I remember Mahavishnu Goswami. Some of you know him, especially if you're Wellington. You may have seen him. He used to go to New Zealand or from England. Mahavishnu Goswami, not the devotee who goes around the world with the extraordinary hat and extraordinary dress. No, that's another extraordinary devotee. But Mahavishnu Goswami was an elderly Indian monk, actually from Maharashtra, but from Gujarati origins. And he was constantly, wherever he go, even I saw him a few weeks before he left his body. I was in what's it called? Nasik. I was in Nasik. And he also happened to be there. And when he heard that we were there, he came to see us. He could hardly walk. He made the effort to come over and see us. We didn't know where he was, but we didn't know he was there. But he heard that we were there. And he came over to see us. We were a group of devotees, Loknath Maharaj, myself. I know him from the day he joined. We're a very close relationship. And he came over, and he just came over, and it was just suddenly you were transported into another world. We were just surrounded. So it just felt like you were in Naimisharanya or something. It was just everyone's mind just suddenly became thinking of Bhagavatam. It's just like in the forest of Naimisharanya, because there was no interference. And Sutta Goswami's words were heard by one and everyone because the atmosphere was clear, he was clear, they were clear. So these pure devotees, they can create that bubble in which we can actually feel Krishna's presence. We start to become serious about chanting and hearing. But we also have to be serious. We have to be a little bit serious. We have to be a little bit sincere to take advantage of that. Sometimes we think I've got more important things to do. Sometimes we're thinking of trying to find fault or interpret. Sometimes we're thinking I should be speaking, whatever it may be. Sometimes our mind, we're still attached to it, drags us away from that point. But in the association of those who have that one-pointedness, Srila Prabhupada, read the Lilamrita, see how one-pointed he is, and so on. Association to develop that or imbibe that one-pointedness. You can pray also. Next one. Ian. Hare Krishna, Ian. Nice to hear from you. It's last time we've done it. Really shows me how to try to increase. Thank you for making that. See, at least Danavir Maharaj has maybe helped at least one of us in today's session to think a little bit more seriously about how we can work on that path towards one-pointedness by filling up those little gaps a little bit more. I know it's difficult as householders with kids because anything can happen any moment. But especially when we get older and we're retiring, that's really the time. Vanaprastha means full engagement in devotional service, hearing and chanting and so on. So fill up those gaps. Pada, Hare Krishna. What is the difference between ego and false ego? Yeah, ego means our actual designation, Krishna Das. False ego means Godas. We think we're the servant of the senses. We identify with the body. We don't think we're the servant of the senses. But rather we're on that platform. We are serving the senses. We're on the bodily platform of life, identifying with that which is not Maya. That is called false ego. We think we're men. We think we're women. We think we're Hindus. We think we're Christians. We think we're this, doctors, lawyers, man, old, young, animal, bird. This is false ego. That is not our identity. That's a false ego. Is natural. Ahankara, we have our akara, our real identity. Ahankara is our false identity. Thinking we're not. And how to cure that? Sarvupadi vinamuktam tatpadadvena nirmala rishikena rishikesha bhakti sevujite. Same process. We cleanse away the upadis. Upadis means these false designations. Sarva, all upadis are cleansed away. Sarva upadi vinamuktam, freed of all false identification. Tatpadadvena nirmalam. The heart becomes nirmalam, pure, cleansed by Rishikena, Rishikesha Bhakti Seva Uchiti, devotional service. We're using our senses in the service of Rishikesh, the master of the senses. This is the process of devotional service to make this change from false ego to real ego. Understanding our eternal constitution as Gopi Bhakta Pada Kamalam, Dasa 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 Anudas. Hare Krishna, thank you. Did not want pranams to everyone from myself. Hare Krishna, thank you. Thank you, Priyank. Hare Krishna. Priyank and Priyanka. Hare Krishna. Jai. India. I think that's it. Wonderful. So try to, whatever's left for your day, try to remember Krishna. Before you go to bed at night, try to hear about Krishna. When you wake up in the morning, try to remember Krishna, have a tape playing. Or if you, I don't know how you do it, but you, maybe these audio books, it's beautiful to hear, or some tape of Prabhupada lecturing, or some kirtan of Prabhupada. Hear from the pure devotees of the Lord their words. The words of Srila Prabhupada in his books are they living, they're alive, they're Prabhupada's ecstasies, they're Prabhupada's presence there. Hear carefully, regularly, and carefully will come in time. Do your best, but hear regularly. Try to keep hearing, and eventually it will come. So thank you all very much. We'll finish there. We'll have a kirtan to end today's session, and I'll let you know through Rasikananda Prabhu as soon as possible when we'll be able to have another one. I can't say when it will be because my schedule is as it is, and you never know what's coming next. Hare Krishna. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Hare Krishna Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna. I had to chant a little quietly today because we're in an apartment block. And in the apartment block, it is only 10 o'clock Sunday morning in Paris. And I think at 10 o'clock Sunday morning is still, we will find that many citizens are still fast asleep. So I know Jeev Jago is our, you could say, our business, but not everybody understands it quite yet. But the real Jeev Jago is wake up, come out of the darkness into the light. Tamashi Mam Jyotirgamaha. Don't stay in this darkness of material illusion. Come out of the darkness by chanting and hearing and worshipping and remembering the personality of Godhead, who is the protector of the devotees. Come out of that darkness. He protects us from going back into the darkness if we take shelter of Krishna by chanting his holy names, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, nectar of devotion, etc. Jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Gaur Premanande. Haribo, 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 Haribo.
Haribo.
Haribo, Haribo.
Haribo.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Hari Bol.
Gurudev Ji, Jai.
Hare Krishna. Haribo.
Haribol Krishna. Haribol Mama.